Today, does God exist? Last week, Sasha gave an excellent introduction to apologetics. Thank you, Sasha. Yeah, give her a hand. She's great. But today, we look at the question, does God exist? You know, everyone basically falls into one of three categories when considering the question of whether God exists. There is the theist, one who believes God or gods exist. There's the atheist, one who believes God does not exist. Then there's the agnostic, a person who claims neither faith nor disbelief in God, but someone who isn't sure either way. They may or may not be interested in coming to an answer. That word agnostic means without knowledge. Basically, I have no knowledge, so I don't know. Personally, I am a theist. I do believe that God exists. And the reason for my believing this are both philosophical and experiential. This is a very important question to answer, as you can imagine, for the answer provides a foundation for all the following philosophical, ethical, moral, and religious discussions. Philosopher and professor at Dallas Theological Seminary and well-known Christian apologist Norman Geisler, in his book Christian Apologetics, begins the book by saying, if there is no God, no creator of the universe, then all other questions are irrelevant. First, one must settle the question of God. So today, we look at that question in our series of apologetics. Does God exist? So we start with a very famous verse in the Bible, Psalm 14, verse 1, which says, "The fool says in his heart, there is no God." Now please don't ever quote that verse to someone who does not believe in God. You're a fool for not believing God exists. Don't do that. I actually know some people who have. It's not a good idea. Now, one of the reasons for that is, number one, it's impolite. But second of all, because in the Psalms, fool means one who is morally deficient. If you continue to read Psalm 14, it talks about somebody who's really, 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 really bad. Throughout the book of Psalms, fool means one who is morally deficient. A person who is immoral. One who follows their desires even if it has negative consequences impacting others. Have you ever met a moral atheist? Sure. So have I. Me too. There are lots of people who don't believe in God, and according to the definition of fool in Psalms, they are not fools. Right? Did you hear that? A lot of people who don't believe in God, and according to the definition of fool in Psalms, they are not fools. Just because one does not believe that there is a God does not mean that they are morally deficient. In fact, I have some friends who are atheists who actually behave better than some of my Christian friends. Dare I say, even myself at times. I wish I was joking, but we all fall, especially after eating 2 butter tarts when we're done. But the point is, don't ever quote that verse to someone who does not believe there is a God. Okay? It's very important that we do that. The context and the meaning do not lend itself to be used as such. Now, although in a world without God, there is no source of objective morality. There is a source for subjective morality, but there is no source for objective morality without God. Subjective morality is found in moral systems which are based on cooperation and, at another level, self-interest. Many theories of evolution have abandoned the idea of survival of the fittest for survival of the cooperatist. recognizing the symbolic interactive relationship of nature. And out of this, social rules and customs develop. There is no need for God. However, this is subjective, according to day-to-day experience. But objective morality needs a source. Here's a video by William Lane Craig, a philosopher and Christian apologist from his website Reasonable Faith, talking about the moral argument for the existence of God. It's coming. It doesn't exist. So as they're getting the video ready, you notice that list on the quick quotes, that list of different apologists, and those are professors, astrophysicists. John Lennox is the head of math at Oxford University, and we're going to put that slide up again at the end of the service. They have all of these fantastic videos. They're just fantastic. Actually, speaking of videos, I should start that out.
Absolutely astounding. There you have it. Undeniable proof that you can be good without believing in God. But wait, the question isn't, can you be good without believing in God? The question is, can you be good without God? See, here's the problem. If there is no God, what basis remains for objective good or bad, right or wrong? If God does not exist, objective moral values do not exist. And here's why. Without some objective reference point, we have no way of saying that something is really up or down. God's nature provides an objective reference point for moral values. It's the standard against which all actions and decisions are measured. But if there's no God, there's no objective reference point. All we're left with is one person's viewpoint, which is no more valid than anyone else's viewpoint. This kind of morality is subjective, not objective. It's like a preference for strawberry ice cream. The preference is in the subject, not the object. So it doesn't apply to other people. In the same way, subjective morality applies only to the subject. It's not valid or binding for anyone else. So, in a world without God, there can be no evil and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. God has expressed his moral nature to us as commands. These provide the basis for moral duties. For example, God's essential attribute of love is expressed in his command to love your neighbor as yourself. This command provides a foundation upon which we can affirm the objective goodness of generosity, self-sacrifice, and equality. And we can condemn as objectively evil greed, abuse, and discrimination. This raises a problem. Is something good just because God wills it, or does God will something because it is good? The answer is neither one. Rather, God wills something because he is good. God is the standard of moral values, just as a live musical performance is the standard for a high-fidelity recording.
Without your love.
The more a recording sounds like the original, the better it is. Likewise, the more closely a moral action conforms to God's nature, the better it is. But if atheism is true, there is no ultimate standard. So there can be no moral obligations or duties. Who or what lays such duties upon us? No one. Remember, for the atheist, humans are just accidents of nature, highly evolved animals. But animals have no moral obligations to one another. When a cat kills a mouse, it hasn't done anything morally wrong. The cat's just being a cat. If God doesn't exist, we should view human behavior in the same way. No action should be considered morally right or wrong. But the problem is, good and bad, right and wrong, do exist. Just as our sense experience convinces us that the physical world is objectively real, Our moral experience convinces us that moral values are objectively real. Every time you say, "Hey, that's not fair, that's wrong, that's an injustice," you affirm your belief in the existence of objective morals. We're well aware that child abuse, racial discrimination, and terrorism are wrong for everybody, always. Is this just a personal preference or opinion? No. The man who says that it is morally acceptable to rape little children is just as mistaken as the man who says 2 + 2 = 5. What all this amounts to, then, is a moral argument for the existence of God. If God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. But objective moral values and duties do exist. Therefore, God exists. Atheism fails to provide a foundation for the moral reality every one of us experiences every day. In fact, the existence of objective morality points us directly to the existence of God.
So that gives you a little bit of a taste of some of the arguments for the existence of God. It's on now. Thanks, Glenn. You see, there's so many of those great videos on there. They go through the ontological argument for the existence of God, cosmological, fine-tuning of the universe. I was going to add that one in, but it's like 5 minutes. It's a little bit long. They're just amazing videos, and there's a whole bunch of those on that list of those philosophers and professors of that that you'll see. I saw in the quote show, and we'll see at the end of the service. But subjectively, as you saw, people can be good. They can do good things without belief in God, but objectively, there cannot be moral good without God. So let us not misunderstand. This isn't about proving atheism is wrong. It's about discovering reasons for the existence of God. The truth is, agnosticism and atheism are very understandable positions. I get it. Really, I do. You know, it's not like I can just text God to join me for a game of pool or, join me for a bite to eat downtown at my favorite restaurant. So to question whether God exists is reasonable, an acceptable pursuit. Why? Because it expresses the need for truth. And when it comes to the atheist position, I really think that there are two things going on. And I could be wrong. But first, I think that it is a reaction to the lack of experience. I believe atheism is a reaction to the lack of experience. And secondly, I believe it is a reaction to evil done in the name of God. First, the reaction to the lack of experience is often an expression of wanting a genuine experience. I mean, really, how exciting is it to experience God? And how disappointing, disillusioned, even angry when we don't. You see, the agnostic approach is more honest and reasonable conclusion to this issue. And atheism can often be a retaliatory position for not experiencing God. Well, I don't see, hear, or feel God, therefore God doesn't exist. Philosophically, this is not a good argument, for our experience does not determine something's ontology. In other words, just because we don't experience something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Just because we couldn't experientially prove that a Higgs boson existed, a subatomic particle, until the very last few years with incredible scientific advancement, doesn't mean that it didn't exist until now. It always existed, even though we didn't know it was there, and we had no way of experiencing its existence. It's a silly argument to say, well, I don't see, hear, or feel God, therefore God doesn't exist. But most people really know that. The verification hypothesis, as it's called, is quickly torn apart in philosophical circles. Now, I believe that atheism betrays the deep desire within us to genuinely experience God. And personally, when I encounter someone who doesn't believe God exists, I see hope. Such a person will not fabricate something or self-generate an experience and then call it God. There's something honest and pure, something which begs to be proven wrong. And behind that declaration of there is no God is a faint wish of the heart that says, but please prove me wrong. But it must be real. This leads to the second popular reason for people choosing an atheist position: evil done in the name of God. One day I met a lady at one of the coffee shops that I often do my writing at through a group of my friends. And she was very intrigued when she heard that I was a minister and had started this church. Very quickly, she pointed out that she was an atheist, and so began a delightful conversation about how we arrived at our positions. Having grown up in the church, she had left and become an atheist. And part of her position was that she said she did not agree with Christianity. I became an atheist because I do not agree with Christianity. Now, I suspected it was not Christianity that she had a problem with, but the behavior of those who called themselves Christians. So I asked her, what don't you like about Christianity? So she named hypocrisy, gossip, people being judgmental, Christians treating each other unfairly, those who go to church and pretend to be good, but then they act morally questionable during the week. She cited injustices done by the church throughout history, the greed, the torture, the war, the abuse. Nodding my head in agreement, there was a pause. But then I asked her, so when are you going to tell me what you don't like about Christianity? Everything you've said is a human problem, not a Christian problem. In fact, you've just agreed with Jesus and the New Testament writers. So maybe it's time for you to discover Jesus for yourself and see how much you have in common. She said she'd never thought of it like that. See, people who do bad things in the name of God or Christianity is not a reflection on God. It just means that they're not following what Jesus said, right? I seem to recall Jesus giving one command: to love one another. If it isn't love, it's not from God. Another very good friend of mine had grown up in a very charismatic church. And after seeing years of manipulation through spiritual gifts, seeing extreme judgment, the exclusion of those whose lifestyles didn't measure up, hearing all the recycled cliches, the lack of intelligent answers to difficult questions, he resigned from the ministry and became an atheist. The lack of love expressed in his experience of Christianity drove him away from God. And most of his friends from the church circles were giving typical shallow answers like, and honestly, somebody said to him, "The fool believes in his heart there is no God." Do you think that won him back? One day he said to me, "Chad, you're the only person I will talk to about God anymore. I don't know what happened to you, but I believe that you did have a real experience. I don't believe in God, but I believe something real did happen to you." I've known him for years. So both of these friends of mine have rejected God based on the behavior of others. This is understandable. However, it's not proof that God does not exist. People's behavior is not proof that God does not exist. It's proof that people are selfish. It proves that there is something wrong with us. It does not prove there is no God. And this trend of rejecting God is found in New Atheism. This is a movement which has tried to make popular the atheist position. Books by Richard Dawkins called The God Delusion. How many of you have read that? 2 people. How about God is Not Great by Christopher Hitchens? Anybody read that one? I see my wife. She's, we have it on our shelf, and so she's pecked through it. Sam Harris is another one. These have become popular books arguing for the atheist position. Another one of my close friends, Steve Burke, was browsing my library when he saw The God Delusion and God is Not Great on my bookshelf. And he was shocked to see them there. Why do you have those books? He asked. Well, I said, if we only read books that we agree with, we can never discover the truth. If we only read books that we agree with, we can never discover the truth. That, by the way, is a key component to discovering truth. If we only read what we agree with, we can't discover truth. If we only read what we agree with, what? We can't discover truth. So I went on to say to my friend, Steve, I said, you know what, Steve? I agree with 80% of what Richard Dawkins was saying in his book. And I agree with about 90% of what Christopher Hitchens was saying. You see, they were attacking religion, and Christianity in particular, but on the basis of the wrongs and injustices done by people over the years. But they both missed Jesus. I agreed with their citing abuses and the injustices that it shouldn't be. You're absolutely right, guys. You're right. But not only do I agree with them, so does Jesus and God. Jesus and the prophets and the New Testament writers, they already beat you to it. It's in there. They've been saying the same thing for hundreds of years. So do not confuse a human problem with a Christian problem or a God problem. So let us remember, lots of atheists are wonderful, moral people whose position is understandable. It is a reaction to the lack of experiencing something that they are told is there, and a reaction to religious hypocrisy, manipulation, and abuse. And although experientially they have reason to reject the existence of God, philosophically these reasons are not proof that God does not exist. Here is a synopsis of some of the main reasons for the existence of God from William Lane Craig, in which God provides a better account of the world than naturalism, a world without God. This is on his website, reasonablefaith.org. So God really is the best explanation for, there we are. Why anything exists at all. The origin of the universe. The applicability of mathematics to the physical world. Actually, that video on reasonablefaith.com called Fine Tuning, it's amazing. It unpacks all of these issues in great detail on the websites. We don't have time to get into them all. But the fine-tuning of the universe is a very, very powerful argument for the existence of God. John Lennox is actually the head of mathematics at Oxford in England, and he talks about that at length as well. The fine-tuning of the universe for intelligent life. Intentional states of consciousness, objective moral values and duties, we watched that video on that. The very possibility of God's existence implies that God exists. That's actually called the ontological argument for the existence of God, and Alvin Plantinga has the best video on that one. He's on that list. Alvin Plantinga he's arguably the greatest Christian philosopher of all times, and he puts together some of those videos as well. It's just great. I love this stuff. Okay, finally, 8, God can be personally experienced and known. So we don't have time to get into all of these, but these are some of the arguments for God that you can explore on those resources. I'll let you go through those on your own. Instead of getting into the minutia of all of these arguments, I thought it would be best to show you some of the videos, like the one we watched earlier by William Lane Craig. So here's another one. This is one of the key arguments for the existence of God. It's called the Kalam cosmological argument. All right? The Kalam cosmological argument for the existence of God.
Does God exist? Or is the material universe all that is, or ever was, or ever will be? One approach to answering this question is the cosmological argument. It goes like this. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore, the universe has a cause. Is the first premise true? Let's consider. Believing that something can pop into existence without a cause is more of a stretch than believing in magic. At least with magic, you've got a hat and a magician. And if something can come into being from nothing, then why don't we see this happening all the time? No, everyday experience and scientific evidence confirm our first premise. If something begins to exist, it must have a cause. But what about our second premise? Did the universe begin, or has it always existed? Atheists have typically said that the universe has been here forever. The universe is just there, and that's all. First, let's consider the second law of thermodynamics. It tells us the universe is slowly running out of usable energy, and that's the point. If the universe had been here forever, it would have run out of usable energy by now. The second law points us to a universe that has a definite beginning. This is further confirmed by a series of remarkable scientific discoveries. In 1915, Albert Einstein presented his general theory of relativity. This allowed us, for the first time, to talk meaningfully about the past history of the universe. Next, Alexander Friedmann and George Lemaitre, each working with Einstein's equations, predicted that the universe is expanding. Then in 1929, Edwin Hubble measured the red shift in light from distant galaxies. This empirical evidence confirmed not only that the universe is expanding, but that it sprang into being from a single point in the finite past. It was a monumental discovery, almost beyond comprehension. However, not everyone is fond of a finite universe, so it wasn't long before alternative models popped into existence. But one by one, these models failed to stand the test of time. More recently, three leading cosmologists, Arvind Borde, Alan Guth, and Alexander Vilenkin, proved that any universe which has on average been expanding throughout its history cannot be eternal in the past, but must have an absolute beginning. This even applies to the multiverse, if there is such a thing. This means that scientists can no longer hide behind a past eternal universe. There is no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. Any adequate model must have a beginning, just like the standard model. It's quite plausible then that both premises of the argument are true. This means that the conclusion is also true. The universe has a cause. And since the universe can't cause itself, its cause must be beyond the space-time universe. It must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, uncaused, and unimaginably powerful, much like God. The cosmological argument shows that, in fact, it is quite reasonable to believe that God does exist.
Are those videos helpful? Aren't they great? There's lots of them there. I bet you can hardly wait to go home and sit down this afternoon and watch them all, go through them all. So very similar to the cosmological argument is the fine-tuning of the universe. William Craig has the video, The Fine-Tuning. of the Universe, which I really do encourage you to watch. We don't have time for that now, do we? Not really. No. Okay. One of my favorite books, moving along. One of my favorite books is called Finding God at Harvard by Kelly Monroe. This is a collection of 42 prominent intellectuals who tell their story of how they came to faith in God. In her introduction to the book, the subtitle reads, Found by God at Harvard. And I love how she puts it. You see, we tend to think that we find God, but it truly is God who finds us. As Jesus illustrates with the shepherd and the sheep, where he says in Matthew 18, Jesus says, what do you think? If a man owns 100 sheep and one of them wanders away, will he not leave the 99 on the hills and go back to look for the one that wandered off? And if he finds it, truly I tell you, he's happier about that one sheep than about the 99 that did not wander off. In the same way, your Father in heaven is not willing that any of these little ones should perish. You see, God finds us where we are. And part of this exercise in apologetics is to show that God meets us in the corners of reason, in philosophy, and in intellectualism, as much as God meets us in the places of experiential joy and peace, pain, angst, anger, or confusion. And looking at reasons for God's existence, it's not about winning an argument to prove someone else is wrong, but to hold up a light that we might find and be found by God. Apologetics is about lighting that path for us back to the 100. It's about shining a light in those who have doubts, that they may find answers to those that believe and grow in confidence that their trust in God would deepen. Apologetics is about igniting the faith in those who have yet to discover God and fanning the flame for those who already have it. Many people like myself, we've taken a step of faith which was accompanied by a powerful experience. And such experiences have been part of humanity for as long as we've been around. William Lane Craig explains this when he says this: experience isn't really an argument for God's existence. Rather, it's the claim that you can know God exists wholly apart from arguments by personally experiencing Him. Philosophers call beliefs grasped in this way properly basic beliefs. Other properly basic beliefs would be the belief in the reality of the past or the existence of the external world. When you think about it, neither of these beliefs can be proved by an argument. But although these sorts of beliefs are basic for us, that doesn't mean that they're arbitrary. Rather, they're grounded in the sense that they're formed in the context of certain experiences. In the experiential context of seeing and feeling and hearing things, I naturally form the belief that there are certain physical objects which I am sensing. Thus, my basic beliefs are not arbitrary, but appropriately grounded in experience. And there may be no way to prove such beliefs, and yet it's perfectly rational to hold them. And in the same way, belief in God is for those who seek Him a properly basic belief grounded in their experience of God. You see, for me, becoming a Christian, arguments for the existence of God, they helped me remain open to the possibility of experiencing God. But more powerfully were the testimonies of people that I knew who had experienced God in real and tangible ways. So I don't stand before you with wishful thinking that God exists, but as one who, as I believe, have truly experienced God through Jesus Christ. Apologetics, it has encouraged and strengthened my faith, shown it to be intellectually powerful, belonging to the top intellects, top scientists, mathematicians, and philosophers of the world. So I encourage you to dive into some of these resources, and as you do, Invite God to be revealed. God exists to be known. Amen.